Dilek Tunan, you're watching A News. Let's have a look at the top stories. Trump hints Iran talks could resume this week as US port blockade continues. Historic Israel-Lebanon talks to revive ceasefire hopes after 3 decades. And Israeli strikes kill 11 people in Gaza, including 2 children. Tensions remain high between the United States and Iran after the collapse of recent talks in Islamabad and the start of a US naval blockade. Washington says diplomacy could resume soon, but both sides acknowledge deep mistrust. Meanwhile, the obstruction of its ports has already brought Iran's sea trade to a halt.
US President Donald Trump said on Tuesday that talks with Iran could resume in Pakistan within the next 2 days. This follows the collapse of weekend negotiations, which led Washington to impose a blockade on Iranian ports. US Vice President J.D. Vance also pointed to progress, but said deep mistrust between Washington and Tehran would take time to overcome.
Look, honestly, after 49 years, there's a lot of course, mistrust between Iran and the United States of America. You're not going to solve that problem overnight. But yeah, I think the people we're sitting across from wanted to make a deal. And I know the President of the United States told us to go out there and negotiate in good faith. That's what we did. That's what we're going to keep on doing. So you never know, though.
He added that Iranian negotiators appeared willing to reach an agreement and said he felt very good about where we are. Iran has not yet responded to Trump's remarks. Meanwhile, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said the country remains compliant with international law and highlighted growing instability in the Middle East.
There is now a problem in the Persian Gulf, and the world has been thrown into turmoil. This has had an impact across the world. People are dissatisfied and have raised their voices. But we ourselves are in the midst of this turmoil, and despite all these pressures, our work is progressing properly.
The comments come as the US military said no ships had passed through the American-enforced blockade of Iranian ports and coastal areas in the first 24 hours of the operation. Lastly, the US-sanctioned tanker Rich Starry made its way back to the Strait of Hormuz on Wednesday after exiting the Gulf the day before, shipping data showed, failing to break through a US blockade on vessels calling at Iranian ports. The Chinese-owned tanker was among at least 8 ships crossing the waterway on Tuesday, the first day of the US blockade. Shipping data showed that it made a U-turn on Tuesday.
Qatar has urged the immediate resumption of maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz and rejected any preconditions for its reopening after US-Iran talks collapsed. A US naval blockade on maritime traffic to and from Iranian ports began on Monday after peace talks in Islamabad failed, with more than a dozen warships deployed. The operation is enforced mainly in the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea, east of the Strait of Hormuz.
We have stood against any attempt to politicize or use the Strait of Hormuz in this conflict or any other conflict. And therefore, of course, we are calling for the immediate resumption of maritime activity through the Strait, and we do not accept any pre-imposed conditions on opening the Strait.
Global nuclear concerns are back in focus as diplomacy and weapons development move in parallel. The UN nuclear watchdog, the International Atomic Energy Agency, emphasised the need to be involved in any agreement between Iran and the United States. Here's more.
International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Rafael Grossi says any decision on how long Iran should limit uranium enrichment will be political. Speaking in Seoul, he said Tehran could accept a temporary compromise to build trust in talks with the United States.
Iran has a very ambitious, wide nuclear program. So all of that will require the presence of IAEA inspectors. Otherwise, you will not have an agreement. You will have an illusion of an agreement. So I am certain that we will be required and asked when the parties come to an agreement, hopefully, to provide the indispensable safeguard verification component of the agreement.
Grossi also warned that North Korea is making serious progress in its nuclear program. He said there are signs of a possible new uranium enrichment facility and increased activity at a key nuclear site.
We have been able to confirm that there is a rapid increase in the operation of the Yongbyon 5 megawatt reactor, also the operation of the reprocessing unit, the operation of the light water reactor, and the activation of other facilities apart from Yongbyon. All of them point to a very serious increase in the capabilities of the DPRK in the area of nuclear weapons production, which is estimated at a few dozen warheads.
However, the agency has found no evidence that Russia is providing technology for North Korea's nuclear weapons program.
To North America now, and US Vice President J.D. Vance has jumped in on Donald Trump's feud, saying Pope Leo XIV should be careful when speaking on matters of theology. Vance was met with strong protests against the US position to the war in Gaza. Here's more on that story.
So the Pope said something where he said, and I'm going to try to remember the exact quote, but he said that God is never on the side of those who wield the sword. God is never on the side of those who wield the sword. I'm pretty sure that he said that exact statement. Now, on the one hand, again, I like that the Pope is an advocate for peace. I think that's certainly one of his roles. On the other hand, how can you say that God is never on the side of those who wield the sword? Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated France from the Nazis? Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated Holocaust camps and liberated those innocent people from, those who had survived the Holocaust? I certainly think the answer is yes, and I agree. Jesus Christ does not. I agree. Jesus Christ certainly does not support genocide. Now, to respond to this guy here, he said, I believe he said the administration supports a genocide in Gaza. And here's my response to that. When we came in, the humanitarian situation in Gaza was an absolute catastrophe. You know who's the person who got a peace agreement in Gaza? Donald J. Trump. So if you want to complain about what happened in Gaza...
Israeli and Lebanese officials said their talks in Washington marked a constructive step toward easing tensions and exploring future border arrangements. Both sides pointed to the need to reduce escalation amid continued conflict involving Hezbollah and broader regional instability.
The Israeli ambassador to the United States believes that his meeting with his Lebanese counterpart in Washington, D.C. managed to discuss a long-term vision for eventually establishing the borders between Israel and Lebanon on an official basis. The meeting was held in the U.S. State Department and overseen by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Israeli Ambassador Michael Leiter said that he stressed in the meeting that Israel will continue to take military action against the Iranian-backed Hezbollah militant group, and that disarming Hezbollah must be a priority if peace is to ever be established between Israel and Lebanon. Leiter added that Israel is ready to work with the government of Lebanon to achieve that goal. Lebanese Ambassador Nada Hamadeh said at the meeting that there was an urgent need for a ceasefire and the full implementation of the cessation of hostilities agreement that was reached between Israel and Lebanon back in November 2024. She called for, quote, concrete measures to address and alleviate the severe humanitarian crisis in Lebanon as a result of the fighting between the Israeli Defense Forces and Hezbollah. Leiter told reporters that we discovered today that we are on the same side of the equation with Lebanon, striking a positive tone. President Trump reportedly pushed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to de-escalate the fighting last week, a move which set the stage for Tuesday's meeting. U.S., Israeli, and Lebanese officials said that the meeting, the first time that direct talks between high-level Lebanese and Israeli officials have taken place in years, was aimed at further isolating Hezbollah and empowering the Lebanese government to fully assert its sovereignty over all of Lebanon. The talks took place as the Trump administration remains hopeful that the ongoing ceasefire with Iran will continue to hold. Iran is believed to have sent billions of dollars of military aid to Hezbollah over the years and considers the group a key military deterrent. Administration officials here in Washington hope that the meeting between the Israeli and Lebanese ambassadors will be the first step for eventual peace negotiations at a mutually agreed time. I'm Ube Shabander, A News, Washington.
Israeli strikes across the Gaza Strip killed at least 11 Palestinians on Tuesday. That's according to local officials. The attacks have deepened tensions despite the ongoing ceasefire deal. Among the dead were children, including a 3-year-old boy killed in a strike targeting a police vehicle in Gaza City and another child killed in the north near Jabalia. Israel has not commented on any of the incidents. The violence continues, with both sides blaming each other for the escalation. Staying on the conflict in the Middle East, Italy has suspended the automatic renewal of its defence cooperation agreement with Israel, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni confirmed on Tuesday. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni said the decision reflects the current situation, as her government has recently criticised Israeli strikes in Lebanon. The agreement, originally signed in 2003, has been automatically renewed every 5 years since 2006. Israel's foreign ministry has not yet commented. Iran has stepped up diplomatic contacts at home and abroad ahead of the expected negotiations with the United States later this week, saying it has claimed $270 billion in war reparation during the mediated talks with the US last Saturday in Pakistan. Here's more.
Tehran has increased its diplomatic activities prior to the upcoming mediated talks with the United States, expected to be held later this week, with reports suggesting Islamabad, Istanbul, or Geneva as possible venue of the negotiations. The ceasefire between Iran, the US, and Israel entered its second and last week, with Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi holding phone calls with his Turkish counterpart, Hakan Fidan, and the Spanish Foreign Minister Jose Manuel Alvarez on Tuesday. Earlier this week, Iran's top diplomat also held phone conversations with his Omani, Saudi, Qatari, Egyptian, and Russian counterparts. Local news media, quoting Foreign Ministry statements, said Araghchi's talks focus on bilateral ties, the latest regional developments, and the Iran-US talks in Pakistan last Saturday. Araghchi and Fidan have been in several phone talks in recent days, with reports suggesting Turkey as one of the venues of the upcoming Iran-US negotiations. In New York, Iran's mission at the UN headquarters, in a letter to UN Secretary General and the President of the Security Council, said that physical remains of the weapons used in the Israeli-US attacks in numerous damaged sites confirmed that they were part of the arsenals of some Persian Gulf states. Meantime, government spokeswoman Fatemeh Mohajerani said that Iran has initially estimated at $270 billion the damages from US-Israeli attacks, which lasted for 39 days. She told a Russian news outlet that demanding war reparations was one of the issues pursued by Iran's negotiating team in Pakistan. With less than a week to the expiry of the 2-week ceasefire, there are unconfirmed reports quoting anonymous sources about date and venue of the next round of talks between Tehran and Washington, but no confirmation so far from the Iranian side. Turaj Shiralidu from Tehran, for A News.
Venezuela's interim leader Delcy Rodriguez has renewed her call for the United States to ease all sanctions. warning that current permits do not offer enough legal security for long-term investment. Speaking during a meeting on Tuesday with the US energy delegation in Caracas, she urged President Donald Trump to fully lift the measures, saying only a full lifting would draw lasting investment to boost the economy. Washington has allowed some limited activity in Venezuela's oil sector, but wider restrictions are still in force.
We again urge President Donald Trump to lift all sanctions on Venezuela so that all investments can move forward fully, because there are always details to resolve and investors need stronger legal certainty. A license, and I will say this everywhere, does not provide legal certainty over time because it is temporary. I believe both the United States and Venezuela are mature enough to establish energy ties, economic relations and cooperation within the framework of both countries' laws.
We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue examining whether diplomacy can realistically contain tensions between Lebanon and Israel and what role international mediation may play in preventing further escalation. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching A News. The United States has hosted direct talks between Lebanon and Israel in an attempt to ease tensions along one of the Middle East's most volatile front lines. The discussions come amid continued instability along the Israel-Lebanon border and concerns about escalation involving Hezbollah as regional actors weigh the risk of a broader conflict linked to ongoing tensions across the Middle East. Now, Washington's role as mediator highlights renewed diplomatic efforts to prevent further escalation, particularly as the situation in Gaza and tensions involving Iran continue to influence security calculations across the region. Let's bring in our guest now to discuss the implications. Gustavo de Aristegui, former diplomat, joins us from Rabat, Morocco. Ambassador, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Now, just to reiterate, tensions between Israel and Hezbollah have intensified in recent months, and they continue to raise fears of broader regional conflict. How central is Hezbollah's role in shaping Israel's strategic calculations?
Well, Hezbollah is not only central in shaping Israel's strategic calculations. Unfortunately, Hezbollah has become central to the stability and peace in the region. Or furthermore, it has become a destabilization factor in the region and has been since 1982 when it was created in the Iranian embassy in Beirut. Let me be very clear. Lebanon is a country that I know extremely well. My father was ambassador of Spain over there. He died in the Lebanese war in 1988 in a shelling. I have Lebanese friends from all communities, and even some of the leaders of those communities, I interact with them by WhatsApp or telephone every single day. And Lebanon is a martyr country. But this means that the first and foremost element that makes Lebanon a martyr country is the terrorist militia Hezbollah. Hezbollah has become a state within the state, and it's not the first time that this happens. And right now, Hezbollah is the main basic obstacle for the region to become a safer and more secure place. Let us be very clear about what the Secretary General Naim Qassem said yesterday. That is a purely mafioso threat to the state, to a sovereign state as Lebanon is, saying that they would not recognize any kind of advancement between Israel and Lebanon, that they would not feel in any way linked or engaged by those talks, that they did not recognize those talks, that they thought that those talks were a surrender to Israel, and that they were completely useless. How on earth can he actually claim to represent the whole of Lebanon? The latest Pew Center polls in Lebanon, which are extremely accurate, show almost 80% of the Lebanese that were polled to show an absolute rejection of Hezbollah and blame them for the state of war and insecurity that they have. Of course, the indiscriminate bombings of certain regions of South Beirut, not South Beirut, Central Beirut, because South Beirut is exactly where Hezbollah lives, have unfortunately provoked collateral damage among civilians. But Hezbollah is a very complex organization. It is not just a terrorist militia. It has hospitals, it has kindergartens, schools, social services, it has ambulances. And they use all of these instances as a means of war. And this is why sometimes when we see in Hezbollah TV, and there's no other contrasted information about that an ambulance has been hit, let us be very clear. Even the emergency workers are armed and have military terrorist training. And again, right now, the biggest obstacle between the United States and Iran to try to reach an agreement to put an end to a war that started on the 28th of February is that they do not accept the disarmament of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is the jewel of their crown. It is the most effective way that they have to exert pressure on Israel, power on Lebanon, and to try to regain some kind of control or influence in Syria, where their brother regime of the al-Assad family imploded and left them without a key ally in the region. So right now, these negotiations are historic in many ways. You know that there has been some very serious incidents in Lebanon, that Sunnis and Christians have expelled elements of Hezbollah from their neighborhoods. First and foremost, to prevent any kind of shelling or attacks on their communities, and to prevent them from becoming human shields of this terrorist group that has taken the whole country hostage for too long.
Okay. Ambassador, I want to come in from a humanitarian angle for a moment. When the Iran-US ceasefire was announced, the 2-week ceasefire, Israel bombed the south of, had carpet bombed the south of Lebanon, and before that, we know that roughly 25,000 people have been misplaced. Now, Israel says they're trying to establish a buffer zone, but what's the plight of these people that have been displaced from the south? Will they be able to return? And once again, we're left to see that the civilians are paying the price here, just as the Palestinians have been in Gaza. What's your analysis there?
Without any doubt, it is the civilians that are paying the price for this, and it's 1.2 million people that have been displaced from the south towards the north. The lines of cars and trucks and people walking from the south to the north and establishing themselves anywhere they can find in Beirut and the outskirts, or even going as far north as Tripoli, are heartbreaking. And I already said in your show some days back that the pretension of occupying the south of Lebanon between the Israeli border and the Litani River is a huge strategic mistake. Right now, Lebanon has a formal and informal sociological coalition against Hezbollah. The majority of the Lebanese people are against Hezbollah. Any strategic mistake or any excessive bombing, any civilian casualties that will skyrocket in the coming days, or whatever has happened already, is going to backfire, and it could unfortunately make Hezbollah regain some of its support that it previously had. First and foremost, among the Shias that right now are disengaging themselves from Hezbollah. And then maybe a part of the rest of the communities of Lebanon that are seeing an excessive use of force in certain parts of the city. The civilian casualties are unacceptable by all standards and all reasons. Lebanon, as I said before, is a martyr country, and the thousands and thousands of Lebanese that have been affected just by being killed or wounded or maimed in this war, and the 1.2 million people that have been displaced from their homes are the victims of this war. Yes, Hezbollah is a terrorist organization, but Israel must understand the very complex sociology of a country that is barely 10,500 square kilometers big, a country that has 5 million people. It's tiny and it's crowded. And wherever you attack, you are going to hit somebody that is innocent. And this is an absolute priority to be taken into account. And Lebanon cannot continue to be the battleground of everybody else.
So Washington has often played mediator between Israel and its neighbours. How effective is US diplomacy today, given shifting regional alliances and changing global power dynamics that we've been seeing?
Well, I have seen in the international media saying that these are the first direct contacts between Israel and Lebanon since 1993. The Oslo agreements. Well, that is not exactly true. They were indirect contacts, and those contacts didn't really implicate the possibility of some kind of an arrangement between Lebanon and Israel. It was more like an impasse of sorts. These are the first real bilateral contacts that could, let's hope that they will, produce some kind of result in the near future. So yes, they are very historic. And I have to praise Secretary of State Marco Rubio for his ability and his resilience and his tenacity in trying to put together these conversations for the very first time in history. And I really do hope that this coalition, this very strong coalition between the President of the Republic, General Yousef Aoun, and the Prime Minister of Lebanon, as you know, according to the Constitution of Lebanon and the Taif Accords of 1991, is a Sunni Muslim, and the peaceful part, which is the majority of the Shia community of Lebanon, this new coalition that wants to regain full sovereignty for Lebanon actually materializes. And let me say one last thing about this. It is of the essence that whoever is trying to impose on Lebanon the obligation of disarming Hezbollah needs to understand that Lebanon needs international help for that. They cannot do it on their own right now. Hezbollah has $1 billion of let's call it military budget. The Lebanese army has $700 million of defense budget. You cannot fight against a force that is deeply embedded in the country and that has far greater means than you. And the only way of doing this is not pushing the Lebanese army to a suicide mission. Right now, they do not have the means to disarm Hezbollah. You cannot put that as a mandatory request or demand, because it simply is impossible. You need to arm Lebanon, train their armed forces, give them the means to be able to disarm Lebanon, and to use the momentum that has been building up in the last years in this quest of the Lebanese people for true sovereignty, dignity, and the respect of all their neighbors, of their territorial integrity, their sovereignty, and their borders.
Ambassador, we're a little short on time, unfortunately, so we'll leave it there for today. Thank you so much for joining us. We always appreciate your time and analysis.
Thank you so much. All the best.
After the break, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Senior diplomats from Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Pakistan have met in Islamabad. The meeting was held as a follow-up to last month's consultations between the countries' foreign ministers. Pakistan was represented by additional Foreign Secretary Tahir Andrabi, while Turkey's delegation was led by Deputy Foreign Minister Musa Kulaklıkaya. Senior officials from Egypt and Saudi Arabia also took part. The outcomes of the talks are expected to be presented at a forthcoming foreign ministers meeting in Antalya, Turkey, on the sidelines of the Antalya Diplomacy Forum. A previous meeting in this format was held on the 29th of March in Islamabad, where the parties discussed developments in the Middle East.
Çünkü şartlara baktığımız zaman şartlar güçlüklerle.
Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif is set to visit Saudi Arabia and Turkey ahead of a possible second round of US-Iran talks. The visits aim to support Islamabad's mediation efforts. Sharif briefed President Asif Ali Zardari on ongoing talks between Washington and Tehran. Sources say he will first meet Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Riyadh before travelling to Ankara. Pakistan hosted rare direct talks between the US and Iran last week, but no agreement was reached. Officials say a second round could take place in Islamabad very soon. According to Iran, more than 3,300 people have been killed in US-Israeli strikes since late February. Tehran has responded with missile and drone attacks across the region. Turkey's Defence Minister Yaşar Güler has warned that the risk of a wider regional war remains, despite the announced ceasefire. He made the remarks while addressing Turkish troops stationed in Qatar. Here are the details.
Turkish Defence Minister Yaşar Güler said there was still a risk of the regional conflict expanding, describing the ceasefire between Iran and a US-Israeli military coalition as fragile but valuable. Güler was speaking during a Tuesday visit to the Turkish Joint Combined Force Command in Qatar, where he addressed Turkish troops following inspections at the base. He said Turkey welcomed the ceasefire and hoped it would become permanent, stressing that long-term stability was essential for both regional and global security. Güler said Ankara pursues a policy aimed at reducing tensions and promoting peace, adding that the presence of Turkish forces in Qatar reflects the strategic approach on the ground. Turkey has maintained a military presence in Qatar since 2015, when it established a Turkish Land Forces Command. This was followed in 2017 by the creation of a joint Turkish-Qatari Combined Force Command. Since then, Turkey has further expanded its military footprint in Doha with the creation of Naval and Air Force commands, aimed at supporting Qatar's defense capabilities. Addressing Turkish troops, Güler noted that Qatar had been directly affected by the regional conflict, now in its second month, including exposure to missile threats. He also praised Doha's response to the war, describing it as calm, determined, and constructive. During his visit to the small Persian Gulf state, Güler held a separate meeting with Qatar's Minister of Endowments and Islamic Affairs, Ghanem Ben Shaheen Ben Ghanem Al Ghanem. Güler concluded by stressing that Ankara's objective was a stronger and more effective military capable of ensuring regional peace and deterrence. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
The United Nations Security Council has updated its sanctions list for a number of senior officials from Afghanistan, revising identity details, former roles and places of residence. The move keeps in place travel bans, asset freezes and arms embargo measures against several top figures in the Taliban administration. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
The United Nations Security Council has announced updates to its sanctions list involving senior Taliban officials, including Prime Minister Mohammad Hassan Nakhun, Deputy Prime Minister for Economic Affairs Mullah Abdul Ghani brother, Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi, and Mines and Petroleum Minister Hidayatullah Badri. According to the announcement, the changes mainly concern identity information, past official positions and locations of residence, but the core penalties remain unchanged. Those names are still subject to international travel bans, arm embargoes and asset freezes under existing UN sanctions. Reacting to the development, Afghan government spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid told Afghanistan's national broadcasters RTA that sanctions and restrictions have been ineffective from the start. He described the measures as unjust and said they violate the rights of Afghans. Mujahid argued that when sanctions are placed on the head of an institution, the impacts extend beyond individuals, affecting the wider institution and ultimately the Afghan people. He also said the Islamic Emirate wants greater understanding with the international community and called on United Nations to promote engagement with Afghanistan rather than apply what he described as political pressure. These sanctions are part of a long-standing UN framework targeting Taliban leaders and key officials. Since the Taliban returned to power in 2021, international recognition has remained limited, with sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and human rights concerns continuing to shape Afghanistan's relationship with the wider world. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
A court case has begun in Armenia involving Russian-Armenian businessman and Strong Armenia party leader Samvel Karapetyan. He was brought to the anti-corruption court on Wednesday following a 10-month investigation. He faces multiple charges, including money laundering and calls to seize power. Seen as a key rival to Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, he plans to run in the 7th June elections. Karapetyan also said he is renouncing his Russian and Cypriot citizenships to meet eligibility requirements. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue analysing regional diplomacy and what's the ongoing dialogue between Baku and Moscow could mean for security dynamics in the South Caucasus. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Azerbaijan's Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov has met with Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Galuzin in Baku, as both sides discussed bilateral relations and regional security issues. The meeting comes at a sensitive time in relations between Azerbaijan and Russia following recent developments that have tested diplomatic ties and prompted renewed engagement aimed at stabilizing cooperation. To discuss the significance of the meeting, we're joined by Fuat Karimli, political analyst from Baku, Azerbaijan. Fuat, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for having me.
So this meeting comes at a time when relations between Azerbaijan and Russia have experienced moments of strain. What signals does this diplomatic engagement send about both sides' priorities at this time?
Well, for sure, there have been some differences in strain between the two countries in the past few years. But a meeting at this level, at least at this ministerial level, it shows that there's some sort of move towards an attempt towards stabilization. So that's not to really say that the relations have diminished to the point of non-existent. There's always been relations. However, it has faced some straining in the past few years. So when a ministerial meeting like this happens, it usually does signal that there's some sort of normalization going on and that there is political will from both sides to pursue the stabilization.
Now, regional security remains a key topic between the two. How important is stability in the South Caucasus for Russia's broader regional strategy?
When we look at it through that scope, in terms of regional stability, we see that Russia has been fighting a war. Ukraine for the past few years has taken on opposing side, the EU and the US. This is, I think, for Russia at least, it cannot be exchanged for any other region. So it is still a stable region in terms of cooperation with Russia and having relations, and it's an opening for Russia as well. We can talk about, for example, the North-South corridor in terms of trade connectivity. But when we come into security, it also shows that Russia, with this move, understands that regional stability, regional security can change, that other actors may get involved in the region. EU, Azerbaijan supplies a lot of natural gas to the EU. US is showing interest in the region through the Trip corridor. So I think Russia is just trying to show that, we're still here, we still want to be part of the region and the developments that are taking place there.
And Fuat, one of the main points of contention between the two countries was the downing of the passenger jet, the Azal passenger jet, and that still hasn't come to a full close as far as we know. Do we know whether that would have been discussed during these talks, these one-on-one talks? Because many other events had followed that particular event, which led to more and more strain between the two countries.
Yeah, these kinds of talks do have room for those kinds of discussions to take place. This is where bureaucratic procedures are kind of put on the sideline. It's ministers, deputy ministers talking, so they can really represent the will of the people of their countries very openly. However, like you said, this is something that hasn't been resolved fully. There have been steps previously by Russia to make amends. However, I think from the Azerbaijani side, this was never enough. And I think any kind of reconciliation, or it's not really that appropriate to call it reconciliation because there's no outright conflict. However, the downing of the Azal plane was a really significant event for Azerbaijan. It's a really tragic event, and it hasn't been resolved fully. So any kind of de-straining of the situation, normalizing the situation, has to start with having addressed the Azal airplane crash. So something has to be done about that from the Russian side.
Okay, Fuat, we're a little short on time at the moment, so we'll leave it there for today. Thank you so much for joining us and for your analysis.
Thank you.
That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for all the latest updates.